Barron Trump walked onto that stage smirking with confidence, throwing subtle insults and mocking Michelle Obama in front of millions. But he never expected her to stay silent, pull out a sealed folder, expose a hidden family secret on live TV, and flip the entire room so hard that Barron froze, the crowd gasped, and the internet exploded within seconds. The hall didn't feel like a normal event space. It felt like a countdown room. This wasn't just a public debate. It was a moment people wanted to witness, record, and replay. The crowd was split in a way you could almost map with your eyes. On one side, clusters of Trump supporters sat together, whispering confidently, some wearing quiet smiles like they already knew how the night would end. On the other side were neutral attendees, students, journalists, and everyday viewers who came for the clash itself. The host stepped forward and cleared his throat, sensing the shift. Tonight, he said, we're joined by Michelle Obama, Harvard-trained attorney, former First Lady of the United States, and one of the most influential public voices of the past decade. A ripple passed through the audience. Some straightened in their chairs. Others glanced at Barron, waiting to see his reaction. Michelle remained still, hands folded calmly, eyes forward, not reacting to the introduction. Michelle still didn't respond. Barron felt the pressure and tried to take back the moment. "So that's it?" he said with a tight half smile. "No response? No defense? I guess staying quiet is easier than answering hard questions." A few nervous laughs floated from his side of the room. He leaned closer to the microphone. When public figures avoid uncomfortable truths, it tells people everything they need to know. He was no longer subtle. The coded language started slipping into open provocation. Barron cleared his throat again, trying to fill the space. "You can sit there pretending you're above this," he added, voice sharper now. "But silence doesn't erase reality. It just hides from it." The host stepped in awkwardly. "Let's keep the conversation respectful," he started, but Barron cut him off with a small wave of his hand. "I am being respectful," Barron said quickly. "I'm just asking for honesty." The room reacted instantly. Murmurs rose. Some people shook their heads. Others whispered. The tension spiked. Michelle inhaled slowly and finally spoke, but only one short sentence. "You talk a lot for someone who's afraid of real answers." Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The effect was immediate. A wave of noise rolled through the crowd. Barron stiffened. His eyebrows lifted in surprise, then dropped into irritation. "Afraid?" he scoffed. "That's rich, coming from someone who's been sitting here pretending she's untouchable." Michelle leaned forward slightly, resting her hands on her knees. Her posture shifted from passive calm to active control. "Untouchable?" she repeated calmly. "No, I'm just not desperate to perform." The room reacted again. Another person clapped once before stopping themselves. Barron opened his mouth, then closed it, trying to choose his next words carefully. He tried to recover. "You're avoiding the topic," he said. "You don't want to face what people really think." Michelle didn't hesitate this time. "No," she said, eyes steady. "I'm watching you. Expose exactly who you are." That line hit harder than any shout. Barron's jaw tightened. He adjusted his jacket and his confidence was cracking at the edges. Michelle stood up slowly. Not rushed, not dramatic. But the second she rose from her chair, the energy in the room changed. Chairs creaked as people adjusted to watch her. Even Barron stopped moving for a moment, like his body reacted before his mind did. She stepped forward just enough to be clearly seen by the cameras, shoulders back, posture firm, eyes steady. "Let me say something very clear," she began, voice calm but strong. "I didn't come here to trade cheap shots or coded insults. I came here because conversations like this matter, but they only matter when they're honest." The room went quiet in a different way now. Not tense silence. Focused silence. The kind that happens when people sense control shifting. She paused, then continued. When I was a young lawyer, fresh out of Harvard, I walked into courtrooms where people looked at me and made decisions before I ever opened my mouth. They judged my skin, my hair, my name, my background. Some assumed I wasn't smart enough. Others assumed I didn't belong in the room at all. Her voice stayed steady, but the weight behind the words landed hard. I learned early that some people don't attack your ideas. They attack your identity because it's easier. A few people in the audience nodded quietly. Others sat completely still, locked in. Michelle took another step forward, and when I entered the White House, that pressure didn't disappear. It multiplied. Every outfit, every word, every movement was analyzed. Headlines weren't just about policy. They were about how I looked, how I smiled, how I stood. That's what public scrutiny culture looks like. It doesn't care about your work. It looks for cracks. It looks for targets. Her eyes flicked briefly toward Barron, not aggressively, but intentionally. So when I hear someone dress up personal attacks as honest conversation, I recognize it immediately. I've lived it. Barron shifted his weight, crossing his arms slightly, trying to appear unbothered. Michelle noticed and didn't slow down. Let's be real, she said. Identity is not a weapon. It's not a debate tactic. It's not something you throw at someone when you're running out of real arguments. Her voice sharpened just enough to cut through the air. Identity is dignity, and the moment you try to use it to shrink someone else, you tell everyone in this room exactly how small your own position is. A low reaction moved through the crowd. Not loud applause. Something heavier. Respect mixed with tension. She stopped speaking for a second and let the silence work again, this time on her terms. Then she added, "You thought silence meant weakness. You thought calm meant avoidance. What you didn't understand is that I was listening. I was watching. And I was letting you show the room who you really are." Her gaze stayed locked on Barron now. He opened his mouth slightly, then closed it again. The confidence he carried earlier looked thinner, less stable. Michelle straightened one last time and faced the audience instead of him. This isn't about winning a moment. It's about setting a standard. If we keep letting people hide behind coded language and fake neutrality, then we all lose. But if we call it what it is and we refuse to let identity be turned into a punchline, then the power shifts. The room felt different now. Heavier, sharper, more focused. Michelle paused, letting the room settle into that heavy silence she now controlled. Then she reached down beside her chair and picked up a thin black folder. It wasn't flashy, no bright label, no dramatic cover, just clean edges and a security-style seal across the flap. The second it appeared in her hands, the atmosphere changed instantly. You could hear it. A few sharp breaths, a chair shifting. Someone in the back whispered, "Oh no." The cameras reacted before the audience did, zooming in slowly, tightening the frame around her hands like they were holding something radioactive. Even the host froze, eyes fixed on the folder, unsure whether to interrupt or let the moment unfold. "I didn't bring this here to put on a show," Michelle said calmly. "I brought it because when you live inside the White House system, you learn something fast. Nothing is taken at face value." She lifted the folder slightly. Every staff member, every visitor, every close contact goes through layers of security vetting, background checks, identity verification, cross-database confirmation. It's not about curiosity, it's about risk. The room stayed silent. When you're surrounded by power, you also become surrounded by information. Legal teams, compliance officers, independent verification specialists. That culture never leaves you, even after you walk out of the building. Her eyes locked on Barron again. "So when you decided to turn identity into a public weapon tonight, you activated instincts I learned in rooms far more dangerous than this one." She broke the seal slowly. The sound of the adhesive peeling open was soft, but it echoed through the microphones like a gun being cocked. The front row leaned forward at the same time. Phones lifted higher. The live stream viewer count jumped visibly on the monitor behind the cameras. Michelle slid the first page out just enough for the white edge to show. "This isn't gossip," she said. "This isn't social media speculation. This went through legal consultants, independent ancestry verification services, and a compliance review chain. Multiple confirmations, cross-checking records that aren't public-facing." She held the folder steady, not shaking, not rushing. It took months. It cost money. It involved people who don't care about politics or headlines. They care about accuracy. Barron's posture changed immediately. His shoulders tightened. His jaw clenched. He took a small step back without realizing it, like his body was trying to create distance from what was coming. "What is this supposed to be?" he asked, forcing a laugh that didn't land. "Are you really pulling out paperwork on stage right now?" Michelle didn't answer him right away. She looked down at the page again, then back up at the crowd. "You wanted honesty," she said quietly. "You wanted uncomfortable conversations. Be careful what you invite into the room." She turned one page. The paper made a sharp, dry sound as it flipped. The microphones picked it up. The camera zoomed tighter. You could see Barron's eyes tracking every movement of her hands. His fingers twitched at his sides. "You don't look comfortable anymore," Michelle said calmly, not as an insult, but as an observation. "That's what happens when words stop being abstract and start being documented." Barron swallowed hard. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "You're trying to intimidate me." Michelle lifted her eyes slowly. "No," she replied. "I'm showing you what preparation looks like." The room felt smaller now, hotter, pressurized. No one laughed, no one clapped, they just watched. Michelle held the folder against her palm like it carried weight far beyond paper. "This is the part where people usually panic," she continued. "They try to joke, they try to deflect, they try to act unbothered. But when the cameras are on and the receipts are real, the truth doesn't care about your performance." Barron shifted again, his confidence draining visibly from his face. The calm young man who walked in earlier was gone. In his place stood someone bracing for impact. Michelle didn't announce the bomb right away. She raised the first page and read the heading slowly, deliberately, like a prosecutor setting the stage before dropping the charge. "Independent Lineage Verification Report. Multi-source biological comparison. Cross-database validation." She paused and lifted her eyes. "This isn't a screenshot from the internet. This isn't rumor. This is layered confirmation." A low wave of whispers rolled through the crowd. Barron shifted his feet, forcing a small laugh. "So now you're playing detective?" he said. "Pulling paperwork on live TV like it's some courtroom drama?" Michelle didn't react. She simply turned the page, letting the paper crack sharply into the microphone. "You asked for honesty," she said flatly. "Now you're nervous because it finally showed up." She continued reading, slower now, building pressure with every sentence. "Maternal genetic alignment analysis, biological consistency review, chain of custody documentation." Then she stopped. Complete silence. Even the cameras seemed to hold still. Michelle looked straight at Barron. "This is the part where people usually interrupt," she said calmly. "They try to laugh. They try to talk over it. They try to discredit the process before the conclusion is spoken." Barron opened his mouth. "You don't get to—" She cut him off without raising her voice. "Sit there and listen. You already took your turn." The crowd reacted immediately. Someone gasped. Another person whispered, "Oh my God." The live stream chat on the monitor behind the camera started flying so fast it became a blur of moving text. Barron's face tightened. His jaw clenched. "You're trying to humiliate me," he snapped. "This is cheap. This is dirty." Michelle didn't flinch. "What's dirty," she replied coldly, "is using identity to belittle someone and then panicking when your own story gets examined." She lowered the page slowly. "According to these verified reports," she said, dragging out the pause, letting the room choke on anticipation. The silence stretched so long it became painful. Barron's breathing grew louder, his fingers curled into fists. He whispered, "Stop." Michelle didn't. "Melania Trump," she continued, voice steady, sharp, and unmistakably clear, "is not your biological mother." The reaction detonated. Gasps exploded across the hall. Someone near the front stood up without realizing it. Another person dropped their phone. The host's mouth fell open as if the words physically hit him. The live stream chat went nuclear. Capital letters, screaming reactions, shock messages stacking on top of each other in real time. Barron staggered backward, knocking his chair slightly out of place. "That's a lie," he shouted. "That's fake. You made that up." His voice cracked halfway through the sentence. Michelle lifted the folder higher so the cameras could see it. "Multiple labs confirmed this," she said. "Independent analysts verified it. Legal consultants reviewed it. You don't get to erase facts by raising your voice." Barron shook his head violently. "You're trying to destroy my family," he yelled. "You're crossing a line." Michelle stepped forward one small step, eyes locked on him. "No," she said firmly. "You crossed the line when you turned personal identity into a public weapon. I'm just showing you what happens when that weapon points back at you." Barron's confidence collapsed in real time. His shoulders sagged, his face drained of color. "This can't be happening," he muttered, rubbing his forehead. "This isn't real." Michelle didn't soften. "Reality doesn't ask for permission," she said. "It shows up whether you're ready or not." The audience reacted again, louder this time, half shock, half stunned silence. Even Barron's supporters sat frozen, eyes wide, unable to process what they were watching. The host finally tried to step in. "We need to..." Michelle raised one hand slightly, not aggressively, just enough to command the moment. "No," she said. "This room needed to hear this." She turned back to Barron. "You wanted to look powerful tonight? You wanted to embarrass someone else? Instead, you exposed yourself." Barron stood there shaking, lips trembling, eyes darting around the room like he was looking for an exit that didn't exist. Michelle closed the folder slowly, the sound of the cover snapping shut echoing through the microphones. She held it at her side and looked out at the crowd. "This isn't entertainment," she said. "This is accountability." The room went dead silent. No applause, no shouting, just stunned stillness. Barron stood there frozen like his body hadn't caught up with what his ears had just heard. His hands started to shake, small at first, barely noticeable, then stronger, enough that he had to press them against the edge of the table to steady himself. His breathing turned shallow, fast, uneven. "This is insane," he muttered, voice low and cracking. "You can't just say something like that and expect people to believe you." He tried to lift his chin, tried to look confident again, but the movement looked forced, stiff, like someone wearing a mask that no longer fit. He attempted a comeback, searching for the sharp tone he had earlier. "Everyone here knows this is political theater," he said louder, pointing vaguely toward the audience. "You're manipulating emotions. That's all this is." But the room didn't respond. No cheers, no supportive noise. Even the people who had been quietly backing him earlier sat still now, eyes lowered, avoiding his gaze. The silence didn't support him. It swallowed him. Barron swallowed hard and tried again. "You don't even have the right to talk about my family," he snapped, but the anger in his voice collapsed halfway through the sentence. It came out thin, unstable. His shoulders tensed, then slumped slightly. The confident posture he walked in with was gone. His body language betrayed him. He kept rubbing his hands together, wiping sweat from his palms onto his suit. glancing toward the exit more than once without realizing it. Michelle didn't move toward him. She didn't crowd him. She didn't raise her voice. She stood still, composed, eyes steady, letting the moment speak for itself. "No one here is attacking you," she said calmly. "What you're experiencing right now is the weight of your own words coming back to you." Her tone wasn't cruel. It wasn't mocking. It was firm, clear, final. That made it worse for him. There was no villain energy he could push against, no emotional chaos to redirect. Barron shook his head again. "You twisted this?" he said weakly. "You set this up." His voice cracked on the last word. A quiet ripple passed through the audience, not sympathy, not celebration, just the uncomfortable realization that the collapse was real. Cameras zoomed in on his face. His eyes looked glassy. His jaw tightened and loosened repeatedly, like he was trying to physically hold his composure together. He tried one last time to take control. "This conversation is over," he said, attempting authority. But it sounded hollow, empty. The host didn't even respond immediately. Everyone could see it. He wasn't ending anything. He was losing it. Michelle took a slow step forward, not aggressively, just enough to be heard clearly by the microphones. "You don't get to walk away from accountability just because it's uncomfortable," she said. "That's not strength. That's avoidance." Barron opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. No words came out. His shoulders dropped slightly, like the fight drained out of him all at once. He stared at the floor for a moment, then looked back up, eyes unfocused, expression hollow. The crowd remained silent, not out of respect, out of shock. They weren't watching a debate anymore. They were watching a collapse. Michelle didn't celebrate. She didn't smirk. She simply turned slightly toward the audience and said, "This was never about embarrassing someone. It was about stopping the cycle of cheap attacks and coded insults. If we don't draw that line, this keeps happening." Her voice stayed steady, grounded, controlled. Michelle took one slow breath, looked across the room, and then said the line that stopped everything. "Identity is not a weapon." Her voice was steady, firm, and unmistakably final. The words didn't sound dramatic, but they landed heavy, like a verdict. The audience didn't move. Even the cameras seemed to pause, holding the frame on her face as if they knew this was the moment people would replay later. She turned slightly toward Barron, not aggressively, but directly. "You tried to use identity to embarrass someone else," she said. "You tried to turn heritage into a shortcut to power. And tonight, you learned the hard way that it doesn't work like that." Barron didn't respond. He couldn't. His eyes stayed down. His shoulders stayed slumped. The contrast was sharp. One person standing in control. One person shrinking under the weight of his own choices. Michelle shifted her focus to the audience. "Public figures don't just represent themselves," she continued. "They represent families, communities, and young people watching from home who are still learning what leadership looks like." Her tone softened slightly, but the authority stayed. "Every word we say teaches someone something. Either we teach respect or we teach cruelty. Either we raise the standard or we drag it lower." Heads nodded across the room. Some people pressed their lips together, clearly emotional. She paused, letting the silence do its work again. Then she added, "I've spent my life watching young people try to figure out who they are in a world that constantly judges them before they even speak, and I refuse to stand on any stage and let identity be turned into a punchline." Her voice tightened just enough to show the emotion underneath the control. "That's not debate. That's damage." Michelle took one small step forward. "If you want real strength," she said, eyes scanning the crowd, "it doesn't come from tearing someone else down. It comes from knowing who you are and not being afraid to let others be who they are too." The room felt different now, warmer, heavier, more human. This wasn't about winning anymore. It was about meaning. She looked back at Barron one last time. "You wanted attention tonight," she said calmly. "What you got instead was a lesson. Carry it with you." There was no insult in her voice, no mockery, just finality, the kind that doesn't invite argument. Then Michelle faced the cameras. "This conversation doesn't end here," she said. "It continues in living rooms, classrooms, and dinner tables across this country, and what happens next depends on what we choose to model." Her words weren't flashy. They were grounded, real, the kind of message that hits hardest with people who've lived long enough to recognize truth when they hear it. The moment the broadcast ended, the internet exploded. Clips of Michelle's calm stare, the folder reveal, and Barron's collapse flooded every platform within minutes. One short video of her saying, "Identity is not a weapon," passed 1 million views before most people even left the venue. Hashtags started climbing fast. Hashtag calm power. Hashtag room flipped. Hashtag accountability moment. News alerts buzzed phones nonstop. Group chats lit up. People who didn't even watch the event live were suddenly watching replays, rewinding, slowing it down, analyzing every pause and every expression. Legal analysts jumped in first. On late-night panels and live stream breakdowns, they called it strategic silence. One former prosecutor said she didn't rush. She controlled timing, pacing, and emotional temperature. That's courtroom-level discipline. Others pointed out how Michelle never attacked first, never raised her voice, and never lost composure. "That wasn't reaction," one analyst said. "That was preparation." The phrase spread fast, turning into a talking point across social media and news segments. Media insiders framed it differently. They called it a masterclass in control. Veteran producers broke down camera angles and body language. "She let the camera work for her," one host explained. "Every pause created suspense. Every calm moment made the other side look louder and weaker." Headlines followed the same theme. Not about scandal, not about chaos, about dominance without shouting, about control without force. Ordinary viewers reacted in their own way. Comments poured in from people watching at home. "This wasn't cruelty," one viral post said. "This was accountability." Another wrote, "I didn't see someone getting attacked. I saw someone finally getting checked." Parents shared the clip with their kids. Teachers played it in classrooms. Older viewers called it the kind of leadership we don't see enough anymore. What started as a debate turned into a national conversation. Behind the stage, the energy was completely different. Barron walked off without looking up. His face was pale, his jaw tight. He didn't speak to anyone at first. A staff member tried to hand him water. He waved it away. His phone was already buzzing nonstop. Missed calls, messages stacking up. His team surrounded him quickly, whispering, arguing, trying to figure out damage control in real time. "We need a statement," someone said. "Now." Another voice answered, "What statement? This is everywhere already." Family reactions hit fast. Advisors warned him not to respond emotionally. Public relations teams scrambled to draft explanations, denials, and distractions. But nothing landed clean. Every attempt to shift attention only brought more focus back to the original moment. The story was already out of their hands. The narrative had escaped. Michelle's backstage moment looked nothing like victory celebration. No smiles, no high fives, no cameras. She sat quietly in a chair, hands folded, eyes distant. An aide asked if she wanted to speak to the press. She shook her head. "Not tonight," she said softly. She stood up slowly, adjusted her jacket, and took one deep breath. There was no excitement in her expression. Only calm, only weight. She didn't look like someone who won a battle. She looked like someone who carried responsibility. When Michelle walked out of the building later that night, the crowd outside didn't cheer. They stood quietly watching her pass. Some nodded, some recorded silently. Some simply stood there, still processing what they had witnessed. The noise was gone. What remained was reflection. Inside the empty hall, the stage lights dimmed. Chairs sat untouched. The microphones were off. But the moment stayed alive. What people remembered wasn't the shouting. It wasn't the shock alone. It was the contrast. Loud dominance versus calm authority. Ego versus control. Reaction versus preparation. Michelle didn't need the last word on stage. The last word traveled with the audience instead. It moved through homes, cars, offices, and late-night conversations. It became a reminder that power doesn't always look aggressive. Sometimes it looks quiet. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it stands still and lets others reveal themselves. And as viewers replayed that final moment again and again, one question stayed in the air longer than any headline. In a room full of noise, who really controlled the night? Not the loudest voice, not the sharpest insult, but the person who never had to raise her voice at all. If this moment made you stop, think, or feel the tension all over again, don't let it end here. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next story where power shifts, truth collides with ego, and quiet control changes everything. Turn on notifications, hit like, and stay with us, because the next confrontation is already building.